Grace and peace and spoiler alert. My name is Ryan. I'm the movie pastor. I watch movies with my movie pass and I talk about them and help you to think theologically about the messages that you're receiving, the ways they're sent, and what they have to do with the messages of Christian theology and the gospel that I believe exist behind everything. This time I watched the movie Black Christmas. I went to the theater expecting to see Midway, and I couldn't get into that showing because I was a little late, so I saw Black Christmas. I don't normally watch a lot of horror movies. They're not really my thing, but horror movies do always have something to say. When we try to make movie-going audiences afraid, we are always preying upon pre-existing fears. We're using something that already scares you, and then we're personifying it. We're making it into a monster, or we're making it into an enemy that we can then make you even more scared about. So there are classic examples of this. The Shining has a lot to do with addiction and addiction recovery, what it means to have someone in your family turn on you. Terminator, and that series, of course, has to do with AI and the rise of the machines. And this one is very obviously, very openly about campus sexual violence. They're not trying to hide that. That's very clear even from the previews. Well, that's an interesting question, because why is it that the fear of our time, the thing people are afraid of that we're going to prey on to make a movie about now, is campus sexual violence? Has campus sexual violence gotten worse lately? Hasn't that always been a concern? And Black Christmas does an interesting job of talking about that. I want to be clear, it's not a great movie. I'm not saying that it's very entertaining or it's a poignant piece of art, but I am saying that the way it engages with this discussion of campus sexual violence is interesting. It has interesting things to say, because you could not say, oh, a new slasher has come to town and this new slasher is the embodiment of campus sexual violence, without implying that campus sexual violence is somehow new. So what they do instead is they invent a founder, Calvin Hawthorne, who is a cult and is connected with this evil idea. And they show the traditions of Hawthorne having existed for a long time through grotesque figures that are carved around campus, but they make the uptick, the particular incident that we deal with in this movie, the result of resistance to it and resistance to these old ways. The movement of the bust of Hawthorne out of the Founders Hall and into the Founders Fraternity, protest of one of the most egregiously sexist professors, and a song that makes fun of the violent behavior of one of the fraternities on campus. And as a result of this, the incidence of violence increases. Well, that's true. I think that's true of what we're seeing on campus. It's true of what we see in many ways. When progress takes 2 steps forward, there is a backlash, and 1 step back is taken. And so when the United States makes moves to improve its relationship with other races, we improve those relationships, but then very racist people get angry and get louder, and anti-racial rhetoric increases. And so with the good comes the bad, and we have to overcome the bad that has always been there in order to really preserve and keep what is good. The Bible talks about this in the story of the birth of Jesus, which is appropriate for a movie about Christmas. They don't talk much about Christmas in the Black Christmas movie. It just happens over Christmas break. But it happens that when Jesus was born, when the Son of God came into the world, who would overthrow the Roman Empire, not the emperor so much, but that once Jesus was born, the emperor's days were numbered, and so was that of the empire. He's building a new kind of empire. Herod was furious He sent soldiers to kill all the boys in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, because the wise men had told him the star first appeared to them about 2 years earlier. Herod's brutal action was fulfilled in the prophecy of Jeremiah. A cry of anguish is heard in Ramah, weeping and mourning unrestrained. Rachel weeps for her children, refusing to be comforted, for they're dead. So when we celebrate the birth of Jesus, and when we read the stories of light coming into the world, when we talk about Advent, and when we remember that there are people for whom the holidays are not a happy time, for whom the holidays bring memories of people who are not there. For many people, incidents of suicide goes up around the holidays, and there's a remembrance of that. We often read this story of Herod's scourging of the infants, and we remember that with the good often comes the bad, and it's not that the good doesn't outweigh the bad, but that the bad has to be dealt with. Jesus and his family had to flee to Egypt in order for the good to persist. That's an interesting way to tackle the problem in Black Christmas. It's worth noting that Black Christmas is a remake. The movie first happened in the 70s and was made again in 2006. And so this is the third remake. I didn't know any of that, but we've often been dealing with this campus sexual violence problem. And there's consistent depiction of how we're going to deal with it. How are we going to solve the problem? Part of it has to do with who's in power. Very early on in the movie, the first person slain, which kind of introduces us to the world, is a young woman on a college campus, and she receives the text messages as she's killed. She makes a snow angel and then is dragged away. And so there is a distinction made between the men and the woman, and there's a demonstration that women within the narrative of this film are angelic. There's something that is angel-like about them. And the men, by contrast, since they are contrasted with the women, are going to be demonic. Later in the film, there is a question of how are we going to deal with this issue? And there's a question of, are we going to deal with it with the police, or are we going to deal with it supernaturally? And the decision is made, the right decision within the narrative of the film, to deal with it supernaturally. The police are not ready for this. The police will not believe us. The police don't realize that the world has changed, that escalation has happened because of progress that's been made, and so now the level of violence is increased. And as a result of that, we can't trust the police. And what we must do instead is destroy this bust. We must engage with the magic that's happening. And there's indeed magic on both sides, because you have the little lucky hairpin. Well, that's an interesting message. It says that the ways we have to solve problems, problems like these, problems like hate, problems that exist throughout time and recur, they have to be dealt with in a magical way. There's a magical element to them. If there's something demonic about a problem, then you have to deal with it in an angelic way. And what does that look like? How do you dig at the root of a problem? Because you can't just poke at it. Poking at it makes it more violent, makes it more desperate. It reminds me of a quote that's been going around the internet by Gus Speth. He says, "I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And scientists don't know how to do that." When you deal with big problems, problems like environmental collapse or problems like campus sexual violence, you need something besides facts. You need something that is transcendent, something that is supernatural, something that is beyond. And if you don't believe in a literal God, you do believe in the idea of cultural and spiritual transformation. You believe in guiding to address root problems that exist within the essence of who people are. How do we deal with those? Well, we're, of course, moving into the church's territory when we talk about that, whether you think the church has done a good or a bad job of it. And it's interesting that in the movie Black Christmas, the culmination of it all results in these boys, both boys who had been manipulated and brainwashed, as well as boys who seemingly were not affected, but who were willing to use the brainwashing and the violence to their own benefit without really taking responsibility of it. They end up locked in a burning room of their own devising. And indeed, the doors to the room are latched with symbols of their fraternity, paddles that they use. And so they are hoisted on their own petard. They are suffering as a result of their own actions. And that's an interesting depiction of what it means to be in hell. That goes with one of the famous quotes, that the gates of hell are locked from the inside. That the results of your own sin, the results of your own degradation, the results of your own selfishness and apathy result in a whole lot of heat and no way out. Well, hopefully we've got some angelic heroes, maybe some strong female voices that can help us out of this pit we are starting to dig, and hopefully the backlash will be over soon and will be the last gasp of a dying habit instead of a resurgence of a long-standing one. I hope you hope that too, and I hope you will like, comment, and subscribe, and most importantly, share, so that other people can engage with these really deep and meaningful ideas in a really pretty shallow and meaningless movie.
And when in scenes of glory I sing